right in the middle of the ice-covered yard outside my house on Ridgeway Lane, my son stood with his hands on his hips, lifted his head, and said exactly 8 words that I can still hear as clearly as each strike. Your mother was stupid to give you money. The cold wind didn't hurt me as much as that sentence. He spoke about Evelyn, the woman who had spent her entire life making up for him, the way people talk about some foolish stranger, and he dared to say it right in front of me, with a face so calm it was cruel. If you've ever heard someone insult the person you love right before your eyes and couldn't protect them, ever lived through that moment when humiliation goes silent, like cracking ice under your feet, leave a single and tell me where you're watching from, because my road to justice began with that very sentence. February in Idaho has a kind of cold that makes you breathe more slowly. It doesn't bite the skin like the wind in Montana, nor sting like winter in Colorado. It is quiet, steady, like an invisible hand touching every wooden seam of an old house. That night, from the living room window, I looked down at Ridgeway Lane blanketed in snow. The pale yellow streetlights reflected off the surface, casting dim patches of light that made the whole hillside look as if it had been covered in a layer of silver mist. The house at number 1198, the one I built myself in 1984 with still strong hands and a heart full of hope, had grown far too big since the day Evelyn left this world. 40 years of living together, then in just one autumn afternoon, I became the sole keeper of the memories hanging on every stretch of wall. There were years when I was hardly home. Civil construction work took me too far, to Dubai, Doha, sometimes even Muscat, projects that lasted for years with only a few weeks each summer to return to Idaho. Evelyn always told me not to worry about her, that she was used to that rhythm of life, used even to falling asleep alone in the wooden house while I was on the other side of the globe. Back then I believed she truly was strong. Now that I think of it, those long periods of my absence created spaces I couldn't see. Spaces where something could grow quietly and no one noticed soon enough. The truth is, though we were still legally married, we rarely truly lived together in the last 2 decades of her life. Not separated, but a kind of marriage in which each person slowly formed their own way of living. I was on overseas job sites, and she stayed in Idaho with her apple orchard and her small kitchen. We saw each other only a few weeks each year, shared a few dinners, then parted again like 2 trains running in opposite directions. No one said it aloud, but we both knew that distance was there. And it was that very way of living apart inside the same marriage that made me miss the smallest changes in Evelyn, changes a husband present every day should have noticed. That night, I sat alone by the fireplace. The fire was still burning steadily, but its warmth couldn't reach the space in my chest. On the table was the small walnut box Evelyn kept under the bed. I had never opened it. She was a private person, with things she kept to herself, and I had never wanted to intrude on that quiet world. But this afternoon, while sorting through her wardrobe, I found a small key wrapped in a handkerchief beside a hurried note with nothing written except the date. I couldn't explain why, only that some instinct told me I needed to open that box. The lid clicked open, and the smell of old paper mixed with the familiar lavender scent drifted out. Evelyn had used that scent for decades, to the point that just a faint trace of it made my heart tighten. Inside were bundles of documents tied neatly with thin twine, each bundle labeled with a year. I pulled out a random bundle, 1998. Beneath the papers was a dark brown notebook with frayed edges. I opened it. The first page struck me with her neat, rounded handwriting. Support for Damien, $1,450, January. The next page, support for Damien, $1,450, February. Then the next, support for Damien, $1,600, July. At first, I thought these were just a few small relief payments. Evelyn had once said Damien was having a bit of trouble. But the more I turned the pages, the drier my throat became. Every page, every year, each line. It was all money sent to my son, not once, not for a short period, but continuously for 40 years. I opened the second box, a sea of money orders, small transfer receipts, and deposit slips, all in Evelyn's name. Regular payments, month after month, year after year, without fail. I sat for hours just to add up those numbers. When the total appeared on the paper, I had to put the pen down to steady my shaking hands. $643,200, nearly 2/3 of the value of the house I live in, an amount that could have supported both of us for the rest of our lives without working another day. I asked myself, why? Then one thing Evelyn once said echoed in my mind, soft but sharp as a needle. Damien is struggling. We're just helping him a little. A little? No. This wasn't helping a son. This was a decades-long draining. I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the notebook as the firelight made her handwriting seem to tremble. I remembered the times I asked Evelyn about small expenses, and she always dodged with a warm smile. I remembered the days Damien came and left quickly with vague excuses. I remembered the look in Evelyn's eyes every time his name came up. It looked like someone holding a secret, afraid of being touched by the wind. When I stood up, my head felt years older. I opened the cabinet under the stairs where Evelyn kept things she wanted to preserve but didn't use often. There was a clear plastic box. Inside was a black cassette tape and a small sticky note with hurried, messy handwriting. If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. My hands went cold, not because of the draft slipping through the door frame, but because I knew exactly what kind of person Evelyn was. She would never write something like that unless what she left behind carried enough weight to pull a whole life into a pit. I stood in the darkness of the house I once thought was safe. The fireplace still burned behind me, and the snow outside was still falling, but neither could warm the question opening before me. Evelyn, what secret did you carry that you could only tell me after leaving this world? I knew I was about to step into a journey no man ever wants to take, yet one he cannot turn away from. Because if I didn't find the answer, then 40 years beside the woman I loved would remain a closed door forever. I put the cassette tape into my coat pocket, stepped out of the living room, and then walked down the hallway leading to the woodshop. The Idaho night was so quiet that each step I took on the wooden floor sounded like a knock from the past. The shop sat about 10 meters away from the main house, its old metal roof clattering softly as the wind swept across. I built this place when I had just married Evelyn, and for decades it was the only space in the world where I could breathe and think at the same time. I opened the door. The smell of pine, fine dust, and polish rose, familiar as an old breath. Planers, handsaws, and half-finished wood blanks lay scattered on the racks. My 1990 cassette player was still in the corner of the shelf, next to the radio. Evelyn once said, "It sounds static, but has charm." The day she died, I didn't move anything in the shop, as if leaving everything untouched meant she had only stepped out for a moment and would come back. I plugged in the machine, slid the tape in, then placed my hand on the play button. That hand, once steady with oak and walnut, now trembled like someone touching cold stone. I took a long breath. The tape rolled. A faint hiss came first. Then Evelyn's voice appeared, thin, raspy, but enough to make my chest tighten. "Arthur, if you're listening to this part, I suppose I'm no longer beside you. I'm sorry for leaving everything to you this way." I gripped the edge of the workbench. The wood beneath my hand was cool and rough, but I couldn't feel anything except the emptiness rising toward my throat. Her voice continued, slowly, like someone choosing each word with care. "I hid something from you for many years. Damien, he didn't just borrow money, Arthur. He threatened me." I exhaled sharply, a cold streak down my spine. Never had I imagined hearing that sentence from Evelyn's mouth. "He said, If I didn't send money regularly, he would put me in a cheap nursing home in Spokane. He knew my weakness. I was afraid of being taken from home, afraid of burdening you, afraid you'd lose your temper and drive the two of you even further apart. I couldn't bear that, Arthur. He also threatened, Evelyn's voice shook, that he could tell our family doctor I was starting to get confused, forgetful. Arthur, I wasn't like that at all, but one note in a medical record is enough for people to believe. I was afraid they would think he was right. Once, he said if I had told you, he would sign the paperwork to put me in long-term care to stabilize my condition. I knew it was a lie, but I didn't dare risk it. And I was scared, because during those years you were still working overseas. Damien kept saying that if I told you, you would abandon your job, fly home angry, and see me as a burden. I was weak, and I believed him. I didn't want you to worry more when you were already so far away. The hand planer on the workbench suddenly felt heavy as lead. I clenched it until my knuckles turned white. Evelyn's voice grew smaller, as if confessing a sin that wasn't hers. At first he asked for 800, then 1,000. Later it became 1,450. Some months he forced me to send 2,000, said it was urgent. I didn't know what else to do but agree. He always said things that made me afraid I was a burden, made me believe that if the money didn't come, he couldn't take care of himself. Every time I heard him sigh on the phone, I softened. I stood still. The hanging lamp above me swayed slightly with the night wind, casting wavering strips of light across the cold cement floor. Each of her words hit my ears like a hammer striking damp wood. You ask why I didn't tell you the truth? Her voice tightened. Because I know you, Arthur. You can't stand anyone insulting family. If you knew, you would face him, and you two have been distant for too long. That sentence pulled my heart taut. Evelyn always feared conflict, always chose peace, even at her own expense. I asked Stan to receive the money and pass it along, because if I sent it straight to Damien, the bank staff would get suspicious. He had been questioned about the source of funds a few times. He was afraid of being flagged for laundering, so he made me go through Stan to avoid attention. I know it was wrong, but I didn't dare defy him. He also demanded I split the payments. Never send the exact amount. Always change the dates. Always use money orders. He said it was safer. Arthur, I didn't understand it all, but I knew he was hiding something. Stan, the man living alone at the end of South Fork Road, hunched back, eyes always wet. Now the pieces fell into place. The way he avoided my gaze, the vague answers whenever Evelyn's name came up. I no longer felt cold. I felt hot, like fresh coals catching flame. Evelyn's voice weakened, as though she was sitting before the recorder with trembling hands. I didn't know when I would be able to tell you, so I left this tape. If you're hearing it, it means I have nothing left to fear. Then a silence long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat pounding against my ribs. At the end of the tape, she said one more sentence that nearly brought me to my knees. I just hope you won't blame him, but if you seek the truth, please do it without hurting anyone else. Click. The tape stopped. I stood in my woodshop, among planks rich with the scent of sap, among tools that had carried me through most of my life. Yet I had never felt more estranged from my own world. My hand rested on the workbench, scored with saw marks, trembling with each breath. I didn't cry. Men like me rarely do. But in my chest, something heavy as a stone was crushing every strand of air. I wasn't angry at Evelyn. I was angry at myself for standing beside her for nearly half a century without knowing she carried a burden heavy enough to leave a final recording. I turned off the shop lights, opened the door, and stepped outside. Snow was still falling, blanketing the road, blanketing the roof of my house, blanketing all the years I thought I understood this family. I looked up at the night sky, drew in a sharp, freezing breath, and spoke loudly enough for the wind to carry. Evelyn, I promise, I will dig up every piece of the truth, not to take revenge on Damien, but so your dignity won't be trampled ever again. That night, in the silence of Idaho, I swore to go all the way. The next morning, when the Idaho sunlight had not yet pierced the thick gray clouds, I drove the old pickup truck down to the town of Pine Harbor. Last night's snow still coated the road like a layer of cold powder, the tires grinding over the ice with a stretched sound that resembled the sigh of an old person who no longer wished to argue with life. I never liked going to the bank, but what Evelyn left behind on that tape made it impossible for me to stay still another hour. Pine Harbor Credit Union sat on the corner. Red brick walls, low glass windows, the old 1980s style of architecture Evelyn loved. She once said the place felt warm like a bakery, and she was right. Every time I stepped in, I felt as if I were being taken back to a quieter time. I pushed the door. The bell on the frame chimed a crisp, dry jingle. Inside, only 3 teller counters were open. A few locals stood waiting, holding deposit slips or checks. The air in the bank carried the smell of new paper and the pine scent from the wooden counters, darkened by age. After a few minutes, a silver-haired woman looked up at me. She wore gold-chain glasses, and her light blue cardigan made her look soft and gentle. I recognized her at once, Grace Whitmore, the teller Evelyn had mentioned a few times. I stepped forward. "Good morning, Grace." She squinted slightly, then widened her eyes as if she had just remembered something. "Oh my, Arthur, it's been so long. I need to request some old statements. From 2001 to 2021, all transactions related to my wife's money orders." Grace showed no annoyance. She simply nodded softly, as though accustomed to widowers or widows coming here to search for traces of the past. She led me to the small desk near the back, powered up the computer, and began typing. Her veined fingers flew across the keys. While waiting for the system to load data, she murmured, "Evelyn, the woman who always came on Fridays." My heart skipped. "You really remember that?" "Why wouldn't I? She always wore that wine-colored wool scarf, gentle and private. I even remember one day she came to send a money order for $5,000. I was surprised because she usually sent small amounts. I leaned toward her. 5,000? Grace nodded. "Yes. And that day—" She paused, weighing whether to continue. "I'll only say what I saw myself. Nothing about anyone's private information." I waited. Grace lowered her voice. "I saw Damien in the parking lot. He was wearing a brand new Rolex Submariner. One of those that costs several thousand, maybe more." My chest tightened like it was wrapped in wire. "The same day Evelyn sent 5,000? "Yes. I remember because her hand trembled a little when she signed the form, while he was laughing on the phone with someone, showing off his new watch." I thanked Grace, trying to keep my voice steady even though something hot was burning in my gut. The statements were finally printed. The sheet was nearly half a meter long, each line a money order transaction. Steady month after month, year after year. It looked exactly like a ledger of endurance. That afternoon, I brought all the documents to the office of Marla Hastings, a paralegal I knew from handling the inheritance paperwork for the forest lot. Marla was around 35, meticulous, composed, but sharp. She opened each page, spreading them across the desk like analyzing a crime scene. Consistent cash flow, cyclical increases. This is not typical family support. Meaning, the receiver is controlling the sender. This is a classic pattern in financial coercion cases. She placed her finger on 2 time points. "Look here. Around 2012 onward, the amounts increased significantly." "Yes. And in 2013, Damien bought the house in Coeur d'Alene." I jerked my head up. "That same year?" "Yes. Public records list the purchase price as $489,000. The same period when Evelyn raised the payments from $1,400 to $2,000, and some months up to $5,000. I sank into the chair. Everything Evelyn had hidden now sharpened into a single cold truth. Damien was never struggling. He was living in luxury, on every dollar she scraped together. Marla closed the folder. Arthur, to proceed legally, will need further evidence tying these transactions to Damien's assets. But, she paused, you're on the right track. I stood, looking at the statements on her desk, as if staring at a wound freshly split open. Outside the window, snow began to fall again, each flake settling slowly onto the road, like someone placing quiet periods onto a story I once believed had ended long ago. I understood then that I had just stepped into the journey Evelyn never dared to take, and I would see it through to the end. I left Pine Harbor when the sun had already slipped behind the line of pines, leaving a fading streak of pale orange on the horizon. Snow kept falling lightly, coating the windshield in a thin layer of powder. I drove toward South Fork Road, following the old map Evelyn once folded into 8 sections and kept in the glove compartment beside the driver's seat. She rarely wrote anything down, but whenever her voice mentioned Stan, I always saw a faint, unspoken hesitation in her eyes. Now I understood why. The road leading to Stan's house was narrow, dark, and winding like a scar cutting through the forest. The deeper I drove, the thicker the air became, the scent of pine resin mixing with moisture, creating a smell exactly like early winter days when the wood hadn't fully dried. Stan's cabin appeared at the end of a gentle slope, a block of dark gray timber, rusted metal roof, a dim yellow light leaking out through the window cracks. I stopped the truck and shut off the engine. The quiet was so complete, I could hear snowflakes landing on the hood, soft and steady like faint tapping. As I stepped onto the porch, the smell of old cigarettes, mixed with rotting wood, hit my face like a heavy curtain. I knocked 3 times. The door cracked open and Stan Reeves appeared, gaunt gray stubble, eyes red like a man who hadn't slept in months. He froze when he saw me. "Arthur, I figured you'd come sooner or later." His voice was hoarse, as if running on its last breath. I stepped inside. The cabin was a mess. Empty liquor bottles rolled across the floor, wood scraps, old wires, and a wooden table that looked like it had survived a dozen winters. A black and white photo of a younger Stan hung on the wall, broad-shouldered, confident, a man entirely different from the one standing before me. He motioned for me to sit in the chair across from the fireplace. The fire was nearly out, only a few faint embers breathing weakly. "What do you want to ask?" "Not ask," I said, my voice cold as steel. "I want the truth." Stan rubbed his face as if trying to brush off the dust of memory. Then he looked down at his hands, trembling slightly. "Evelyn asked me to send the money for her. 40 years. My grip tightened on the edge of the chair. The confession didn't surprise me, but hearing it from Stan, the man in the middle, turned it into an actual blade. "Why did she choose you?" "Because I used to work at the post office. I knew how to send money orders without leaving easily noticeable traces." He hesitated. "And she trusted me." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "Trusted you enough to hide it from me?" Stan stayed silent for a long time. Then he stood, walked to the wooden cupboard near the door, rummaged through old boxes and papers, and pulled out a worn yellow envelope. He set it on the table between us. "This is something I never wanted to have to give you." I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note, folded in 3, the edges frayed with age. When I unfolded it, the words hit me like a blow, straight to the heart. "I, Damien Merrick, acknowledge receiving $1,200 from Evelyn." I stopped. Evelyn, not Evelyn. He spelled his own mother's name wrong, a naked kind of disrespect that made my throat lock. I looked up at Stan. He bowed his head like a man confessing a sin. "He told me to keep that paper in case proof was ever needed." I never understood why he'd spell her name wrong, until I saw how Evelyn's hands shook when she gave me the cash. Stan's voice cracked. Once she couldn't even sign. Her hands were shaking too much. I asked if I should call you. She said no. She just shook her head and said, "Arthur has too much to carry. He doesn't need the weight of my fear." I closed my eyes. Something inside my chest tightened hard. Stan, I said slowly, each word dropping like a stone onto cold ground. I won't let her die, in silence. He bit his lip. Then, as if gathering every ounce of courage, he disappeared into the small bedroom. About 2 minutes later, he returned with an old 2006 flip phone, the plastic casing cracked, the screen cloudy. I think it's time you hear this. He powered it on, opened the voicemail folder, and selected the third file. A man's voice played, muffled but clear enough to freeze my blood. Did you send the money on the right day? Don't make me remind you about Spokane. You know I do what I say. Stan looked at me, eyes red and wet. This message. Evelyn told me not to delete it. I didn't answer. I stood and walked to the window, watching the snow fall softly across the dark yard. What I felt then wasn't anger. It was colder, deeper, a kind of resolve that appears only when someone realizes silence has lasted far too long. I turned back. Stan, I'm going to need to borrow that phone. He nodded, almost collapsing into the chair. Please, finish this for her. I placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezed once, then stepped outside. The night wind sliced across my face like 1,000 thin blades. Snow fell harder, gathering on my coat, on the truck roof, on the resolve taking shape inside me. I opened the truck door, tucked the phone into my inner pocket, and looked back at the cabin one last time. The dim yellow light flickered through the window, like a small candle fighting to stay alive in strong wind. The silence on South Fork Road was so complete that when I started the engine, the sound felt like a vow. I will uncover everything, every piece, leaving nothing behind. I drove to Coeur d'Alene the next morning, the sky thick and gray as if holding back snow that hadn't yet fallen. The road along the lake glimmered with silver light, the water so still it reflected the pine branches standing upright on the hillsides. I once brought Evelyn here in the summer of 1992. She liked it because it was quiet, and I liked it because it never tried to show itself off. How ironic that today the reason I had to return was the very man who had exploited her trust for 4 decades. Damien's house sat in a new subdivision, modern pitched roof, gray stone exterior, a front yard laid with white gravel. Nothing like the home of someone struggling, as Evelyn used to say. When I cut the engine, I noticed 3 neighbors standing near the curb, paper coffee cups in hand. They glanced at me, then back at Damien's house with that soft curiosity only small neighborhoods can sustain. I stepped onto the porch. The doorbell camera lit up instantly, its small light flicking on like a steel eye-tracking movement. A beep sounded, then Damien's voice snapped through the speaker, sharp enough to make even the cold wind pause. What are you doing here? I'm busy. I didn't have time to speak before the garage door rolled open. Damien stepped out, keys in hand, a gleaming Rolex on his wrist catching the dull morning light. Behind him was a brand-new black Lexus SUV, the license plate still smelling of paperwork. He looked at me the way someone looks at a salesman who's shown up at the wrong address. You don't have to worry. Mom wanted to help me, voluntarily. His tone held a trace of contempt, as if Evelyn's story were an old poem he was tired of reciting. I looked straight at him. Voluntarily? Damien laughed, a thin, hollow sound with no hint of remorse. You wouldn't understand. Mom loved me. I only took what she wanted to give. The neighbors had stopped talking altogether. They leaned against the low fence, watching silently as if a scene from a movie had wandered into their street. One middle-aged man even crossed his arms, curious. I set the document case on the stone porch. 20 pages, each page a month, each line a moment, Evelyn carved out of her own life for him. I unlocked the case, pulled out the neatly clipped stack, and held it toward Damien. Here are 40 years of Mom wanted to help you. His face paled just a fraction, not much, but enough. His eyes skimmed the repeated amounts. 1,450, 1,600, 2,000, then 5,000 in recent months. You went through Mom's things? He barked, trying to claw back his swagger. I looked for the truth, I said. Something you should have given. Damien glanced at the neighbors watching him. He forced a stiff smile and raised his voice, trying to reclaim control of the scene. This is just family business. Nobody forced anyone. Dad's overreacting. I didn't reply. I simply set the entire stack of documents neatly on the doorstep, then stepped back. Something changed in Damien's expression when he realized I hadn't come to plead or negotiate. I'd come to make him see himself, without saying another word. I turned and walked toward the truck. The cold wind off the lake cut across the back of my neck like a thin blade. As I opened the door, I heard the doorbell camera beep again, signaling movement. I paused, not turning, only listening. Behind me came the sound of papers hitting gravel. Then Damien's voice snapping, "Ridiculous!" and the dry thud of a hard kick against the folder. The pages scattered along the fence line, fluttering like birds ripped from their nest. The neighbors no longer pretended to look away. One woman even raised her phone. The doorbell camera probably caught everything. I got into the truck and closed the door. I didn't check the rearview mirror. I didn't need to. What needed seeing, I had seen. What Damien had revealed, he would have to face again and again. As the engine rumbled to life, I knew this confrontation was only the beginning. A polished surface can't hide rot forever, and the truth, once it breaches the ground, never agrees to be buried again. The office of Marla sat on the edge of Sandpoint, in an old red brick building beside the railroad tracks. That afternoon, snow fell lightly like chalk dust, covering the pines outside the window with a layer so thin it would vanish with a single strong breath. I stepped inside, hearing the fireplace crackle against the smell of old paper, the kind of scent that calms any attorney and makes any guilty man tremble if he understands the cost of a signature in the wrong place. Marla had spread the entire set of documents across the long table, not a stack, but a whole system arranged without a millimeter of misalignment. The recording I captured from the night Evelyn sat trembling at the kitchen table, her voice barely a whisper describing, "Every month he said it was urgent." I didn't dare ask. The handwritten slips from Evelyn, small slanted letters, ink trembling, listing the amounts she gave Damien each month. Bank statements spanning many years. A timeline of Evelyn's health, from minor pains to her most recent treatment. Marla stood with her arms crossed, eyes fixed on the timeline, as if assembling the bones of a major case. "Arthur, there's something you need to see immediately." She slid a folder toward me. On top was an Idaho petition for adult guardianship. The date was clear. 2 years ago. The petitioner, Damien Hale. Purpose, to obtain full guardianship over Evelyn Sloan. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Marla continued, her voice low but sharp. This petition was denied. Reason, no evidence of diminished capacity. No medical report attached. He tried to gain legal control and failed. I turned each page. He had requested authority over finances, signing power, property management, everything someone seeking to consolidate an inheritance would want. He didn't just want the money, I said slowly. He wanted Evelyn's entire life under his hand. Marla nodded, her tone as sharp as a letter opener. You understand now. Guardianship would have been the first step. If approved, he could restructure the will, sell assets, even transfer ownership of the Hayden house. All legally. My grip tightened on the chair, not from anger. I had spent all of that earlier in Coeur d'Alene, but because I could now see the architecture of this betrayal. Deliberate, calculated, not impulsive. Damien had laid groundwork for a long time. Marla pulled a new folder from the cabinet, dark blue cover, sealed with a clip. Now it's our turn. She placed 3 documents before me. One, a draft of a new last will and testament, redirecting all assets into the Sloan Heritage Trust, locking out any outside interference. 2, a directive granting me and Marla financial power of attorney, should Evelyn have wished it. 3. A sealed packet to be notarized that very afternoon at the office across the street. Marla explained she wasn't representing me or Damien personally, but serving as legal counsel for Evelyn's estate, the Sloane estate, to ensure nobody could twist what Evelyn left behind. With these documents, Marla said, every plan of Damien's will collapse, and most importantly, he won't know anything is happening until it's far too late. I looked at her and realized she wasn't just my attorney. She was the person who had seen through the cracks in my family's house and knew how to turn them into a legal trap. Marla gathered the old documents, packed them into a cardboard evidence box, and sealed it with a red label. Evidence pack, Sloane Estate. Arthur, today we don't fight with emotion, she said. We fight with paperwork. That's what the court listens to. The last of the afternoon closed with the sound of a notary's stamp striking paper. Dry, firm, final. Damien thought he was one step ahead. He didn't know. We had just moved an entire road ahead of him. That night, after the brief conversation with Marla, I drove back to Ridgeway Lane with a heaviness in my chest, like a waterlogged block of wood. The snow-covered road was so quiet I could hear the engine compressing each grain of ice beneath the tires. The wooden house where I had lived alone for years appeared under the streetlight, still the same familiar shape. Yet ever since the tape Evelyn left behind, everything felt foreign, as if I were standing inside someone else's life. I opened the workshop. The scent of maple, fine dust, and a trace of old polish rose around me, warm and sad at the same time. This was where I spent months, sometimes years, between overseas construction sites, working here until exhaustion took me. Evelyn would visit, bringing pie, bringing tea, bringing the kind of gentleness I had thought I understood. But there was a part of her she had never wanted me to see. I switched on the light. The warm glow washed over the tools hanging along the wall, over the unfinished block of wood I once meant to turn into a letterbox for her. Thinking now she had probably intended to tell me many things, then changed her mind. I set the case of documents on the table and sat in my usual chair. The papers, receipts, recordings, Stan's letter, all of it lay there like a mountain I could no longer walk around. A memory surfaced. One summer evening, Evelyn stood in this workshop holding the picture frame I had just sanded smooth. She brushed her fingers over the wood and said softly, "Arthur, don't get angry. Everyone has their own way of growing up. Don't push him farther away." Back then I thought she meant the small arguments between father and son. Now it sounded like someone trying to hide fear, not offering gentle advice. I stood, took a long piece of maple from the shelf, its pale surface dry and clean like it was waiting for a story to be carved into it. I fitted the chisel, adjusted the lamp, and began carving. No sketch. My hands knew the path. Each cut felt like a vow, like a nod to the resolve rising in me. Justice works in silence. It wasn't a threat. It was the guiding principle of all my years in construction. Foundations that last must be built quietly. Now I was using that same principle to deal with my family, something I should have tended to long ago. I returned to the table and began assembling the truth pack, the file that would determine Damien's fate. 1. Bank statements. Steady cash flow stretching 4 decades. 2. Money order receipts. Evelyn's trembling signature in the years when I was gone on distant job sites, leaving her alone. 3. Stan's signed acknowledgement. Undeniable proof. Damien's handwriting misspelling his own mother's name. 4. The threatening voicemail. His voice blunt, harsh, stripped of respect. 5. The guardianship attempt. His petition to control Evelyn 2 years ago, at the height of our years apart. 6. The 40-year timeline, each mark a wound she endured in silence. When I closed the leather case, the lock clicked with a dry snap. It sounded like the shutting of an old door, the door of endurance. I picked up the phone. My finger hesitated for a second before dialing Damien. 3 rings. His irritated voice came through. "Why are you calling this late?" I answered, low but steady. "Sunday, come home. We need to talk." "I'm busy." "Good. Come. Anyway." I hung up before he could add another word. In the dim workshop light, the maple piece I had just carved lay still on the table. The cuts had not fully dried, but looking at them I felt as though Evelyn were standing behind me, resting her hand on my shoulder, saying nothing, just nodding. The Idaho night was colder than usual, but for the first time since the night I opened the wooden box, my heart felt warm enough to walk into the confrontation ahead. That Sunday, Ridgway Lane was covered in a thick white layer that swallowed every sound. No cars, no wind slipping through the pines, only a silence so heavy it felt as if you could hear time sliding across each branch. I stood on the porch, holding the ceramic mug Evelyn used to favor. The rising heat brushed my face, but did nothing to warm the widening hollow in my chest. I knew clearly, today was not a conversation between father and son. This was the first time I stood in Evelyn's place, and possibly the last time I would see Damien as the boy I once taught to walk on this very road. From afar, an engine tore through the stillness of the hillside like a rip of metal. The black Lexus SUV glided into the yard, its headlights sweeping a cold beam over the snow, reflecting a sharp silver glare. Damien stepped out, hurried but arrogant. Expensive coat, steel-bright watch, shoes wrong for ice but perfect for a man trying to prove something. He didn't look at me first. He looked at his phone, as if I were just a shadow in the frame of his life. When he finally raised his head, he didn't end the call. He only spoke loud enough for me to hear, his voice tinted with impatience, barely covering irritation. "Why did you call me here?" "I have plans. Make it quick." I didn't answer. I simply tilted my head toward the wooden table, where I had placed the leather case I had spent 2 nights arranging page by page, trace by trace of what Evelyn left behind. The doorbell camera clicked on. Harsh white light exposed every line on Damien's face, clearer than the moon ever could. I saw the annoyance in his eyes and a flicker of panic that flashed and vanished as he forced his composure back into place. He exhaled sharply. "Don't start about money again. Mom was stupid to give it. If she wanted to help, that's her choice. You don't know anything, so stay out of it." The words didn't stab. They dropped into me like a boulder, not because he insulted me, but because he called Evelyn, the woman who kept him alive, who endured him for 40 years, stupid. I said nothing. I unlocked my phone, pressed play. Evelyn's voice, thin, trembling, heartbreakingly real, poured from the small speaker on the table. "If I don't send it, he'll put me in a cheap nursing home. I'm scared, Arthur. So scared." Damien froze as if yanked off the ground. His eyes widened, his chest rising and falling fast. I turned up the volume. Her voice grew even clearer. "I beg you," he said, "if I tell you, you'll abandon your work overseas and be angry with me." I didn't dare say anything, Arthur. Damien lunged forward. "Turn that off." I stepped back half a stride, just enough to keep him from reaching the speaker. In that moment, his eyes darted across the speaker, the snow, the leather case, as if he were facing himself for the first time in his life. I opened the case. I laid the documents out on the table, angling them so the LED light hit every number, every signature, every month Evelyn bent under his threats. "This," I said slowly, each word deliberate, "is 40 years of your mother paying the debt of your greed." Damien reached to snatch them, but his foot hit the thin ice on the step. The ice I knew was still there after last night's freeze. He slipped hard. His body slammed onto the concrete. His hand couldn't break the fall. The crack echoed sharp as a wood-cutting strike. Papers flew into the air and rained down across my porch, white on white snow, like the wounds Evelyn hid all her life. Damien pushed himself up, snow clinging to his hair, his shoulders, his face twisted with anger and humiliation. He screamed, his voice warped. You think I'm scared? I've had to take care of myself for years. Mom helping me was normal. This house, it will be mine anyway. I looked at him like he was a stranger, a man Evelyn had fed with fear, a man I had let drift too far. No one owes you anything, I said, my voice low and cold, least of all your mother. Damien turned away, anger collapsing into something like defeat. He didn't pick up the papers. He didn't look at me. He rushed into the SUV, slammed the door, and the Lexus roared off, leaving spiraling snow like white smoke. I stood alone on the porch. Snow fell again. The papers remained scattered across the ice, cold but truer than anything Damien had ever said to us. For the first time, I didn't feel cold. I saw my purpose clearly. Today, Evelyn had spoken, through the silence of snow, and I understood this was only half the road to the truth. The next morning, I woke in a house filled with the reflected snowlight from the distant valley. The quiet was so deep I could hear the wood contracting inside the walls. I brewed a cup of hot tea, set it on the wooden table by the window, and opened my phone, not to check the news, but to review the doorbell camera footage from last night. I watched it minute by minute. Damien stepping out of the SUV. The words, "Mom was stupid to give money." His shout, "I deserve that money," like a man convinced he was untouchable. And finally, the stumble as he slipped. The papers of Evelyn's money scattering into the air and falling like small wings torn from their branch. Nothing but the truth, so stark it chilled the spine. I saved the recording as its own file. No edits, no cuts, no additions. The truth doesn't need makeup. I didn't post anything. I sent the video and Evelyn's voicemail audio to one person only, the administrator of the Harrison Neighbors Facebook group, Evelyn's old friend from the church reading circle. 1 minute later, she replied, "Arthur, people need to know, so it doesn't happen again?" I didn't disagree. I simply wrote, "She deserves to speak one last time." Around 9 a.m., Evelyn's audio and a short clip from the camera, only the voice and Damien's face, were posted to the group. No one saw him fall. No one saw the papers scatter. They only heard him confess with his own voice. Comments poured in fast, like wind sweeping through the Ridgeway Lane pines. Poor Evelyn! How could he talk to his mother like that? I can't believe he called himself her son. No one asked questions. The camera recorded. Sound doesn't lie. I sat in the living room without closing the curtains, without turning on the lights. The house glowed with the white snow reflecting through the glass. I didn't answer any messages or explain anything. Silence, as Evelyn once taught me, is sometimes the simplest shape of strength. By noon, the emails hit like floodwater. Contracts canceled, buyers withdrawing, a homeowner demanding to change agents immediately, a law office announcing a temporary freeze on transactions due to conduct inconsistent with professional standards. Among all the emails, one sentence repeated like a cold blade. "We cannot continue working with Mr. Damien Hale under the present circumstances." Then the company he worked for sent an official notice. "Mr. Hale, you are required to appear Monday to address the recording circulating in the community. The behavior suggesting coercion of a parent for financial support must be reviewed to ensure the integrity of our staff." I read every word slowly, not happy, just feeling a hollow shift inside, as if things were finally falling into the places they had belonged all along. Late afternoon, Damien posted a long statement on his personal page. He claimed I had manipulated, staged cheap theatrics, divided the family, spread misinformation. But beneath it, every comment asked, "Is the voice in the camera yours? Why did you speak to your mother that way? If you didn't do it, show the statements." He fell silent. By evening, the hardest blow arrived, an email from the Idaho Regional Bank, where Evelyn had made her transactions. I didn't open it right away. I only saw the preview line, "Request for explanation of unusual transfers during 2018 to 2023. SAR procedure has been activated. Suspicious activity report. The first step of a long investigation, the first step of truth rising through the snow like a stone buried all winter. I closed my eyes, resting my hand on the cooled mug of tea. A single sentence Evelyn once said echoed in my head. Arthur, people only see the light after they've been swallowed once by their own darkness. And tonight, darkness had begun to swallow Damien. I didn't reply to a single comment, didn't join the arguments spreading across social media, didn't defend myself even once. Silence, in this case, wasn't avoidance. It was the only way to keep the story from turning into a shouting match. Yet my silence made Damien increasingly uneasy. He thought I was preparing another blow, while in truth, I was only watching, quiet, steady, clear-headed enough to see the final path of this story. 3 days later, Marla called me. Her voice was even, emotionless on the surface, but with a tension running underneath. Mr. Arthur, Pine Harbor Credit Union has just sent a request for Damien to explain the source of funds. They've also notified our office. This is the right moment to bring him into a mediation session. If we delay, APS may open a formal investigation. I stood by the window, watching the snow melt into thin trails of water on the steps. Everything had reached the point of no return. Send the invitation, I said. No pressure, no threat. Just the course that needs to happen. Marla replied, I'll prepare all documents. The meeting will be held at the Sandpoint office. If he fails to appear, the file goes straight to the Attorney General. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Outside, the oak wind chime I once made for Evelyn swayed softly. It sounded like someone reminding me. It's time to bring this story to its final reckoning. And that's how I stepped from the noise of Ridgeway Lane into the cold room of a law office, where the truth was no longer a story, but evidence. Marla's law office sat on the second floor of a red brick building beside Sandpoint's main street. That morning the sky was overcast, gray clouds hanging over Lake Pendorile, wrapping the whole town in a thin layer of cold stillness. I sat in the small conference room, my hands resting on the thick binder Marla had spent 3 weeks preparing. The room was so quiet I could hear the wall clock's hand sliding over each mark. One day before the meeting, Marla had sent Damien a formal notice requiring him to appear under Idaho's mandatory mediation procedure. If absent, the entire file would be transferred to Adult Protection Services and the Idaho Attorney General's office. This meeting was not optional. It was the final step before criminal proceedings could begin, which meant he had to show up this morning, whether reluctant or furious, and nothing would change that. Marla was reviewing the documents one last time. You don't need to say much, she said, her voice steady and even. Let the evidence speak. I nodded. I wasn't here to shout, not here to retaliate. I was here to put a final period at the end of the 40 years. Evelyn carried her burden alone. 10 minutes later, the door burst open, not the polite kind of entrance, but the kind made by someone desperate to end the meeting as fast as possible. Damien appeared, dark circles under his eyes, messy hair, coat thrown on in a hurry, but he still tried to sound defiant. Are we done yet? I don't have all day. Marla didn't look at him. She simply turned the binder toward Damien, each page marked with colored tabs. We'll begin now, she said. I nudged the case gently toward him. These are the things your mother left behind, all dated, authenticated, and undeniable. Damien laughed, but the sound was weak and fractured. You're exaggerating. Mom helped me because she wanted to. Marla opened her laptop and turned the screen toward him. On it was a 30-plus year compilation. Every money order, every transfer through Stan Pine Harbor, credit union statements, the handwritten slip misspelling Evelyn's name, the threatening voicemail, the denied guardianship attempt. She spoke slowly, each word placed exactly where it belonged. Total, $643,200. Under Idaho law, that amount qualifies as financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult if the recipient is aware the sender is under coercion or manipulation. Damien's face went pale. I didn't force anyone. She just... He swallowed hard. You don't understand. I didn't interrupt. I let silence do its work. Marla continued. If Mr. Arthur pursues prosecution, APS and the Attorney General's office will open a full investigation. At that point, your unusual spending from 2018 to 2023, car purchase, house purchase, credit upgrades will be reviewed. Pine Harbor Credit Union has already asked you to explain, correct? Damien lowered his head. His hands gripped the edge of the chair until the knuckles turned white. So, what do you want? He asked, his voice rasping like someone running out of breath. I looked straight at him. I don't need your apology. I paused. I need you to face yourself. Marla slid a thin folder toward him, a folder heavier than stone. It wasn't a threat. It was the last way out. The document stated clearly, no one goes to jail. No criminal procedure initiated. Damien must repay half the total amount Evelyn sent, $321,600, directly into a scholarship fund in her name. All family asset disputes end permanently. He is barred from initiating any claims regarding the house or any inheritance. Marla spoke gently, but every word fell onto the room like an unnegotiable seal. This is the only lenient option you have, she said. Damien read a few lines, his hands trembling. Then unexpectedly he began to cry. Not loud cries, but the kind where tears fall despite every effort to stay composed. Dad, I didn't think it would turn into this. He choked, then forced out a sentence that sounded like it barely survived his throat. I didn't think Mom was that afraid. I closed my eyes. Not one of his tears could erase a single day of what Evelyn endured. Sign it, I said. Not for me, for your mother. Damien picked up the pen. The tip hitting the paper sounded like metal, striking an empty room. He signed. No one said another word. When Damien stood to leave, his shadow stretched across the tile floor, trembling under the dim light from the window. For the first time in his life, his walk held no arrogance, only the emptiness of someone who had finally seen the line between what he believed and what he had done. The mediation ended, and from that moment, justice began to take shape. That night, when I opened the safe, among the neatly stacked files, was a thin ivory envelope. No inscription, only a familiar fold. Evelyn's way whenever she hid something meant only for herself. I carried it to the table, sat under the soft yellow lamp, and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Evelyn's handwriting looked different this time. Not rounded, not slow, but tilted slightly to the right, like someone writing quickly before courage could evaporate. Arthur, I am only writing this letter because some things should not be on the tape. My breath slowed. You asked me many times why I never told you the truth. The real reason wasn't that I feared Damien, but that I feared you. Not that you would get angry, but that you would think you had failed as a father. I had to stop. The words felt like a hand resting gently on my shoulder, yet heavy enough to make it hard to breathe. Damien didn't change overnight. I saw it little by little. The way he looked at the house, the way he asked about assets, the way he fell silent whenever your name came up. I picked up the phone many times to tell you, but each time I imagined your face when you learned how far your son had drifted. I couldn't bear it. I touched the edge of the paper, feeling as though I were touching her regret itself. There is something else I never told you. 12 years ago, I tried to stop supporting Damien. 3 months in a row. That was when I had to go in for hip surgery, staying nearly a week in the hospital. And that was the only time he visited me. I froze. I had just come out of surgery. He stood by the bed and didn't ask if I was in pain, didn't ask what the doctor said. He only asked, "Where's this month's money?" That was when I understood what he needed wasn't a mother. I closed my eyes. The room was silent. except for the fireplace snapping softly as if reacting for me. Arthur, don't let the years you were away become a reason to blame yourself. That distance didn't create the darkness in Damien. It only revealed what had been inside him all along. At the end of the letter was a line that made me place my hand over my chest. If you choose to move forward and seek the truth, do it with your heart, not with my wound. And the final line, I love you. If this house still holds warmth, it's because of you, not because of the things I hid. I folded the letter and placed it inside the wooden frame I made when Evelyn turned 60. The frame sat there by the fireplace, where the fire would touch it every night. And for the first time since everything began, I felt I finally understood what Evelyn truly wanted to leave behind. Spring comes to Idaho without noise. It doesn't crash in the way it does in the southern states, nor arrive in warm gusts like I used to feel during my work in Dubai. On Ridgway Lane, spring arrives in its own way. The snow on the eaves thins day by day, water dripping slowly like time learning a new rhythm. On certain days I could even hear the ground breathe, a familiar sound I hadn't felt in years. My woodshop lit up again, after months where it echoed only with the planer or the lonely strike of a hammer. Today it welcomed 12 young people, faces both eager and cautious, partly because they were here to learn a craft, partly because the story of the new scholarship had spread across town. The wooden sign hanging above the door carried the line I carved by hand. Evelyn Merrick Craft and Woodworking Scholarship, for those who build with honest hands. The lettering was straight, neat, unadorned, exactly the style Evelyn liked. When I mounted the sign, it felt as though she was standing behind me, smiling, her hand resting gently on my shoulder, as in the peaceful years before. The first class began with me placing a thick slab of pine in front of them. I wanted to say something profound, but what came out was simple. Wood doesn't lie, neither should you. They chuckled softly, but their eyes brightened. One of them asked why I created the scholarship. I didn't answer directly. I only said everyone has something to mend, and the best way to mend it is to use your hands for the right purpose. During the break, I stepped onto the back porch for some air. Sunlight spilled through the pines, landing on the cracked tabletop like flecks of gold. I sat in the old chair, my fingers tracing the small groove Evelyn once scratched into the edge with her fingernail, the secret mark only the two of us knew. In that moment, I felt someone watching me. I turned. Damien stood about 30 meters away, at the edge of the road leading down to town. He didn't approach, didn't wave, just stood there, hands in his pockets, his eyes stripped of the arrogance and the armor he wore the last time I saw him in the law office. He looked smaller, as if the past months had sanded down the shell he used to hide the softness inside. I didn't call out. I didn't move toward him. I simply nodded. He nodded back, slightly hesitantly, like someone trying to step into unfamiliar ground. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, just a signal that a person can change direction when they finally touch the edge of themselves. And a reminder, redemption, doesn't start with an apology, but with a willingness to face the consequences of one's own making. Damien lingered a few more seconds, then walked away, his steps slow and heavy, but no longer running from anything. I returned to the shop. 12 students were waiting, their eyes looking to me for the next beat. I stood in the center, rested my hand on the planer that had followed me through half my life, and said the one line I knew Evelyn would understand if she could still hear it. Justice doesn't shout. It just stands there, waiting for us to be brave enough to look at it. No one spoke for a few seconds. The planer started up, humming softly in the room, then slowly settled into a steady rhythm, the sound of things being rebuilt with truth, with labor, with honest hands. Outside, the last patches of snow began to melt. Water trickled along the workshop's entryway, carrying with it tiny flecks of sawdust. the remnants of the past leaving the ground to make space for something new. I inhaled deeply, feeling lighter than I had in years. Ridgeway Lane no longer felt as cold as that winter. And I, a worn old woodworker, after a lifetime of circling around mistakes and silence, finally stepped into a new chapter, one where my hands didn't just make things, but rebuilt a life that had fractured long ago. It ended with the planer running in the morning light, a soft, steady sound, like the way justice truly moves, not loud, but never stopping. If you've listened this far, and if in your own life there was ever someone like me, a person who endured too long, stayed silent until they forgot their own worth, then I hope you remember that justice always has its path if we are steady enough to walk it. If this story reminds you of a memory, a person, or a moment that once unsettled your heart, leave a single and tell me what city you're listening from. I treasure every shared word, and if you'd like to stay with me for more stories about dignity, choices, and truth, follow the channel. I'm grateful you're here, so that each time I speak again, you'll sit back and listen with me under the quiet gold of a warm lamp.